Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Zoner.
And I'm John Davis.
Welcome to Spirit Cafe.
Come in, sit down, and
grab a cup of love.
A Spirituality Without the Guilt podcast. Hello, my good friends, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Cafe. We are here in the Spirit Cafe studios, which are uniquely divided between two states here and there. And we are bringing to you an episode today about one of our favorite topics, at least one of mine, is spiritual books. And what books have we run into and experienced along the way that have helped us in our journey? But before we can talk about that, let's bring in the one, the only, the beautiful and powerful Miss Tamara Zoner. Hello, Tamara. How are you?
Hello, John. I'm very well. How are you today?
I am doing fine and dandy.
Good.
Or as my mother used to say, okie dokie.
Okay.
Life with coffee is much better.
Oh, you've got a coffee. All right. All right. Look at that. I'm just drinking water because I've already had my coffee.
Well, you're drinking water because it's what you're made of.
That's right. Right.
I was actually one of the lines that one of the comedians at the Renaissance Festival used to do. He was always very, very health conscious, and he's like, I drink water because it's what I'm made of. and so, nice. All right, good for you, man. Where's that coffee? Anyway.
I'm actually, my goal is to wean myself off of coffee over the next couple of weeks and take a 2-week break.
Oh, yeah.
I feel better when I do that.
Yeah, so. Yeah, it's interesting. When I go off of coffee, I actually feel better too. And actually, it's interesting. The majority of my dairy is in my coffee because I eat very little dairy, with the exception of the occasional cheese. I love cheese. But I put the cream in my coffee. And so that's basically my dairy consumption dropped by 50% when I stopped drinking coffee, which is great.
Yeah.
So today we are talking about spiritual books in our journey. Have you had any very influential books in your journey?
So many, so many. I think that books are why I'm on the journey, or at least what prompted me to get really in it. We're all already on the journey, and the books that opened my eyes made me want to step fully with 2 feet and be consciously on the journey.
Right. I get that. It's an interesting perspective, because I think everyone to pick up a book itself means you're looking for something, right? Mm-hmm. Now, for me, I had a spontaneous Kundalini rising, and it freaked the crap out of me. And I was like, what the heck am I? I need this journey. I need to figure out what the hell this is, right? And because I had the Kundalini rising, and then the next night I had an out-of-body experience. And I wasn't even on a spiritual.
Couple of days, huh?
Yeah, I wasn't even on a spiritual journey. I was just kind of like trying to stay warm in a tent. And what happened was my sister had said to me, I was telling her about it. My sister Patty, who you've seen online anyway. She said, "Have you read this book called The Celestine Prophecy?" And I was like, "No, I've never even heard of it because I didn't even know." She says, "Well, you should get it and read it." So at the time I was working as a landscape designer at a company called Heckinger's. And at lunchtime, I would walk across the parking lot to this little Italian restaurant, and I would have an Italian lunch almost every day, which was wonderful, by the way. And then I always had time after lunch to go to the Barnes and Noble, which was right next to the Heckinger store, which, for those of you guys who don't know, Heckinger's became Home Depot. So I wandered over to the bookstore, and I'm like, well, what was the name of that book? And I could not remember the name of the book. And so I walked in and I asked the lady at the counter, where's your religion section? Because this is how far removed I was from spirituality. I didn't know that there was a spirituality, metaphysics, or New Age section. I asked for the religion section.
Wow.
So she sent me to the religion section. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at all these books, and I'm like looking at it, and all of a sudden the hair stands up in the back of my neck. And I turn around, and the only book on the shelf behind me that's facing cover forward is The Celestine Prophecy. And I got that book and I started reading that book, and that book opened my eyes to so many things.
Mhm.
And what was great about that book was it's an adventure story.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so
It's fun to read.
it's fun to read. Yeah. And I started seeing auras and seeing energies because of that book. And it was a massive eye opener for me in a lot of ways. And those were the years that I became a vegetarian, which didn't go well for me in the end. But it was very much an eye opening book for me. Did you have one that was the first book?
Well, and I've mentioned this book before on the podcast. I think one of our first podcasts, The Clan of the Cave Bear, was the first book that opened my eyes to another way of being, right? Because I had been, as you, raised Catholic, and that was the only way, and it didn't jive with me, and I didn't know why, and just felt like totally disconnected from that. And then I went to California to go visit family, and was at my grandmother's house and picked a book off of her bookshelf to take with me to camp, because we were going for 2 or 3 weeks to camp in the mountains, which we did every other year. And I took it with me, and I remember lying on the mattress that was under the trees and the big broad sky in the Sequoia National Forest, and reading this book and having my mind blown, because they talked about totems and, spirit animals and old spirits, and being guided in this very different way, and medicine women, and basically shamanism. And I was just completely enraptured and felt like I had come home. And that just opened me to so much more, and then sent me on a journey of like finding other books. So I read a book on animal wisdom and nature science, and I can't remember the author, but it's on my bookshelf behind the screen. Nature science, and just like tuning into your own wisdom and the wisdom of nature, which was very cool. So those were kind of my first steps. And I also read the Celestine Prophecy right around that time as well. And man, I was just so excited to breathe in a spirituality that felt expansive.
Right. Oh, I get it. Yeah. And for me, the second book was actually the first in the Conversations with God series. Because there was 3 of them, but I the second and third didn't really hit me well, but the first one was like, wow, that one hit me pretty hard. And I find it interesting. A lot of people will get into one of the books or a book, and it'll become their religion almost.
Yeah.
But for you and I, it was like the next book was just adding and enriching our spiritual experience.
Yeah.
I
was lucky when I lived in Grand Rapids after college, there was a shop called Spirit Dreams. And so my friend and I would go there and just walk around and check things out. And I feel like also, even at the regular bookstores, I was just pulled toward the New Age section. Growing up, I didn't know what that was. But once I was wandering about in bookshops by myself or with my friends, I just was drawn to that section. And I don't even probably remember half the books I read in my 20s, but I just would go be in that section.
Right. No, I get it.
Right?
I get me too.
Yeah. And in the store, Spirit Dreams, they had all these wonderful books, and they had crystals, and they had psychic readers. And it was just like, oh, this feels good to me. This feels way better than church. This feels more like church than church.
And to me, it was interesting because everything that I read made me go further back in history to find other things. And I often quote the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and the Bible. Those books came to me after the New Age books did. And what was really interesting was the more I read from all the books, my spirituality became simpler and simpler and simpler. And to the point where I realized that even in the New Age, they were a lot of the New Age material was creating their own dogma. and their own ritual, and the more I just started to see the universal truths, and I say that very specifically, you can find the same information in all the books. And when I started taking just the universal truths and paring away the extraneous, what I found was a much more simple expression of spirituality and self. But if it wasn't for the exploration of the book, starting with that simple Celestine prophecy book, and going all the way through the Vakanam route and everything and all that stuff, it was the journey of the books was a journey of finding a very simple spirituality for me.
I love that. And it's similar to what I did, like with each book that I read, or even class that I took in college, world religions and spirituality. I just collected what I liked and what felt like a good fit for me, like piecing together a puzzle, and let go of the rest. There were parts of Buddhism that I absolutely love, and some that I was like, man, that's not really for me. And just moving around there. And then after I got married, I kind of shut it all down because that was the situation. And then years later, in an attempt to kind of find some common ground, we actually watched The Secret together. And that was my relaunch into spirituality. And I must have read every single featured teacher's book in that movie. So Michael Bernard Beckwith's books are amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, he's just incredible. And then I read Marcy Shimoff's Happy for No Reason, which of course came back into my life a couple of years ago, and now I'm teaching it. And The Passion Test, and then once I left the marriage, I read even more. I finally read The Four Agreements, which I would say is a good primer for any human.
Sure. Yeah.
What are some other ones that made a huge impact on you?
There were so many. One of the ones that for me personally, and if you know my own spiritual journey, you know why this would be a big one. It was the book called The Messengers. It was about a guy who started getting all these 444 morning messages, and come to find out, when he was regressed, he remembered being the Apostle Paul, and the whole book was about him. And very, very interestingly enough, is I came to meet him and have dinner with him a few times, and very, very different person from me, and which makes perfect sense in past life stories. But I ended up traveling to Egypt with the author of that book, which was an interesting experience, to say the least. I'll just leave it at that. But so that book was very influential because of the fact that it was happening right at the time. I'll tell you something else that really came powerfully to me was the writings of Edgar Cayce. I got really into the writings of Edgar Cayce, especially after in the middle of all the time finding out about my past life stuff, I picked up a cheap paperback called Edgar Cayce on the Millennium, and I'm reading it, and in there it says, John the Beloved will again be named John. And I was like, what? and then I ended up diving into that. So the Edgar Cayce writings were very interesting. There's a lot in there that I think is I think whenever you have a channeled writing like that, you have to pick and choose what feels true to you. And I think it's with any book you look at, right? Yeah. Really. Because any book that's being written is being written from the author's perspective and through the author's own filters. And so
absolutely,
you have to pick and choose what feels right to you, which is something that you said that was so beautiful. You found the things that work for you, and then you let go of the rest.
Right, because I think that too many people literally latch on to a book or a teacher, and then they consume it, and then everything is that thing, and everything else is wrong, which is what is the thing I'm trying to dispel, right? For people. Like, as a coach and as a teacher and as a spiritual teacher to some extent, I want you to connect to your own wisdom. And if you're just taking on everything I say or every book that I recommend and not assimilating it for yourself, then I'm doing my job wrong. And you have other options to explore. We all are our own best teachers and best resources. And these books and mentors and teachers are simply like signs on the way to a cool vacation, right? You're just like, oh, do I turn right or left at this turn? Oh, maybe I'll hang out here for a few minutes. I don't know. I think I'll let that one go, or I'll bring this one with me.
Right.
So we get to figure out for ourselves. And if we're just, one of the, and this could be controversial, people, so forgive me, but one book that I think people take on as a religion is the
Course in Miracles.
Yes, thank you. It was in there. I couldn't get it forward.
I was about to bring it into the conversation because it absolutely is being taken on as religion, and and the reason I asked is the reason I brought it in was the reason I was going to bring it in. You brought it in, but I was going to bring it in.
You got the words out for me.
Right. Yeah. The reason I was going to bring it in was because I get asked about the Course in Miracles all the time because the author says it was channeled from Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I tried the Course in Miracles and it just never sat with me. It was never something that resonated with me. And the reason it doesn't resonate with me is because spirituality to me is not a struggle or a year-long journey. It's something simple, and it's a unpacking for that trip rather than packing for that trip.
I love that.
Yeah, and so when I look at the Course in Miracles, it's a year-long journey that you have to go through, and at the end of the year, you come down to like the most simple message possible. It comes down to almost nothing, and I'm like, it just didn't work for me. So and what I find really interesting is people ask me all the time whether it was Jesus who channeled that to her. And my response is, I said, the information in the end is very good, but I have a hard time believing it was Jeshua because Jeshua was all about the present moment and being very simple. And I can't imagine him in any way, shape, or form taking a year to teach you something that is so simple. And, people get vehemently angry with me about it.
People are super into that book and that way of life. And I think there are some wonderful things in it. I did a 40-day shortcut course, which I found a lot of benefits through. And I feel like people become addicted to this Course in Miracles, and then it's the only way. And there is no one way, just like there is no one word for what we like to refer to as the yada yada. And that's why I think I was interested in this topic, because I was like, there's so much diversity in the text that we can read and so many different teachers. And I think the whole point of spirituality, when you get to that bottom line of love, is to open your mind to different ways of being and different ways of seeing, so that you can recognize that we are all love, we are all one, and there's no right way.
Right.
Except for being a good, kind, compassionate human.
Right. And the Bible, it says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Now, in Christianity, they think that means a place where I'm going to live when I cross over. In my opinion, what that means is there are many ways to God. There are many avenues to God, many beliefs in God. And as my mom often said, spirituality is a personal journey. Yes. And each one of us must find our own path, our own truth, our own belief. And, the Course in Miracles may not work for me, right? And it may work for you, but is it right of you to judge me for my way? For my mansion within the house of God.
Right there. And that's what that you just hit the nail on the head, right? It's not right for anyone to judge anyone else for doing spirituality a different way than we do, as long as there's, no harm done to others. Right. I'm okay with judging people who are harming others.
Right. Well, there you go. I think we can agree on that one. If you're harming others, I'm going to judge you.
Yeah, I'm going to judge you. I'm going to tell you that's the wrong way.
I'm going to step in between you and that person.
Right. And if there's love as the bottom line, then there's no wrong way.
Right. And God, since God is love, love is always right. Right. And it's so interesting, when you're talking about the idea of, new age dogma, old age dogma, it all comes down to the dogma itself is the religion.
Mhm.
And when new age books like A Course in Miracles become a religion, then the message within them can become very detrimental, even though the message may be a good one.
Right.
Because the followers of it will become very detrimental. They'll say, you have to believe what I believe.
Exactly.
And I think when you're going through your journey and you're finding all these books that mean so much to you on your journey, latching onto one as a singular truth, God is too big to be encompassed by one school of thought. And you need to realize, I believe, I'm not going to ask you to believe what I believe, but you need to realize that you can find God in many and varied ways. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah.
But I think the journey of books itself is the way most of us find our way through our spiritual path. So is there any other books that were hugely impactful for you? I'll tell you one of the books that was really impactful for me later on in my life was a book called The Vakanam Route. And it was a Swami Narayan was a 11-year-old boy who reached enlightenment when his parents died. And he actually did a 13,000 kilometer trek around India, but it was in the 1700s. So it wasn't really that long ago. So there's a lot of documentation on him and a lot of documentation on his, and like they still have his clothes, right? There's the Vakanam route is a whole bunch of paramsas, which is basically spiritual teachers, sat down and just asked him questions. And he just answered questions from them. And that it was all compiled into the Vakanam route. I found so much wisdom in that book. Now you do have to, when you read it, you have to kind of go through it and learn some certain Indian phrases so that you understand what they're talking about. But really was one probably in my later journey, probably the most impactful lately.
Cool. I would say most in recent years, probably I've enjoyed a couple with the Dalai Lama.
Oh yeah, he's good.
Yeah, The Art of Happiness was a good one. And then the Book of Joy. That was a fun read because it really is so full of joy. And then two more. I pulled up a list of books and I've read almost all of these on this list of, I don't know, most influential spiritual texts. One that a friend of mine gave me, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, was The Untethered Soul.
Oh yeah, I've read that one.
Yeah, Michael Singer. And that one is really beautiful and just it's kind of that unpacking that you're talking about. That's what it's about. And I've watched some interviews with him and listened to some interviews with him, and he was going through some serious, stuff during the writing of that book. And it's a beautiful, beautiful example of really being unattached. And yeah, it's untethered.
Right. And the unattachment, Buddha talks about the unattachment all the time, about release attachments. And it's so amazing when, as you read various books, you can become very attached to what they're teaching. But until you become unattached and keeping yourself open to the next bit of learning or the next doorway that opens and the next chapter you read, until you release the attachment to one school of thought, you can't really progress forward into another.
Right. And I like books too that aren't strictly spiritual, but they're stories. So they're fiction books. Like The Alchemist is one of my favorites.
I love that
one. Man's Search for Meaning. This is on the list of, you've never read that? Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was in the Holocaust. And he would watch the people in the camp with him just to see how they behaved. And I use one of his quotes from that book in my workshops, where it's, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, his ability to respond to his surroundings. And so it's a hard read because it's the Holocaust, but
Right.
and I wouldn't have thought of it necessarily as a spiritual text, but really when I see it on this list, it is, because it is about making that decision for yourself for what kind of human you're going to be, even in the most horrible circumstances. And so that's a really good one.
I love this idea of it not being a spiritual text. I think any book you read can be a spiritual text because you can get anything out of it. You can read something that goes completely against you, and that in itself is spiritual in the fact that you have now found a belief that you don't believe.
Yeah, I appreciate. I'm trying to think of how I could consider Stephen King books spiritual. But yeah, you're right. You can always find something that doesn't jive with you, and then let that affirm what does.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, you see all the alien movies, right? Or the alien books, and they're like, every alien is an evil entity, right? And I'm like, yeah, I don't believe that. if there's aliens, why wouldn't they be loving? Why wouldn't they be caring?
Well, and as far as we know, they are. So we get to make that up until we know better.
There you go.
Oh,
so,
this is fun.
This has been a lovely one. So why don't you take us out of here with your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are of gratitude and appreciation for our viewers and our listeners. And we would love to hear what books have made an impact in your life. So be sure to visit us on Facebook and YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube now, go ahead and comment about what books have made an impact in your spiritual life. And as always, we're just so grateful you're here. Keep coming back, share us with your friends, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you for joining us at Spirit Cafe, a place where you can safely explore your spirituality without the guilt or dogma of religion. Leave all comments and suggestions on the Spirit Cafe podcast Facebook page.